The black sands of Iwo Jima swallowed everything: boots, blood, and even the echoes of war. In February 1945, as the U.S. Marines prepared to storm the island, few could imagine the nightmare that awaited them. The Japanese defenders had turned every inch of volcanic rock into a fortress. From hidden tunnels, pillboxes, and caves, they waited, silent, patient, invisible. Above ground, the Marines faced open terrain, with nowhere to hide. And at the heart of their defense, the Japanese machine guns waited like steel predators, ready to cut through anything that moved. But among the thousands of men preparing for the assault was one sergeant, just another face in the sand, a man whose name history barely remembered. Yet his small act, his improvised trick, would end up changing the way American machine guns were fired during one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. It wasn't written in manuals, it wasn't authorized by command, but it worked. And on the beaches of Iwo Jima, that small edge meant the difference between life and death. Before that day, the Browning M1919 machine gun was already a legend among Marines. It was reliable, heavy, and deadly, but also limited. It could fire around 500 rounds per minute, respectable for its era, but not enough against the waves of gunfire unleashed by the Japanese Type 92 heavy machine guns. Those weapons could spit out bullets faster, and their positions, camouflaged in hardened bunkers, gave them nearly complete protection. The Americans had firepower, but not the speed to suppress or outgun an enemy hidden beneath the earth. In the days leading to the invasion, American engineers and ordnance specialists debated how to increase the rate of fire. Some wanted to modify the recoil spring or shorten the barrel travel. Others dismissed it. It was too risky, too likely to jam in the heat of battle. But not everyone followed the rules. Sergeant Daniel "Red" Lawson, a 30-year-old machine gunner from Illinois, wasn't an engineer. He was a farmhand turned Marine, tough, resourceful, and stubborn. And like many in his platoon, he'd seen what happened when a gun slowed down at the wrong moment. 2 weeks before Iwo Jima, aboard a Navy transport ship rocking in the Pacific, Lawson began tinkering. He'd spent hours cleaning and reassembling the Browning, studying the internals, testing its rhythm like a musician learning the beat of a drum. He knew that the recoil booster, a small cone-shaped device on the barrel's end, used escaping gas to push the barrel back faster. More gas meant more force, and more force meant a quicker cycle. If the gun didn't tear itself apart, the manuals warned against tampering with it. But Lawson, driven by experience and desperation, had an idea. He scavenged bits of metal from the ship's machine shop, filing and shaping them late into the night. The other Marines joked that he was teaching the gun to dance. But Lawson wasn't playing around. He adjusted the recoil booster's aperture, tightening it slightly, forcing more gas pressure back into the mechanism. He also altered the buffer spring tension with improvised spacers from a dismantled flashlight. It was crude, dangerous, and completely unauthorized. But when he test-fired it on deck, the gun barked faster, noticeably faster. Instead of the steady thud-thud-thud rhythm of a standard M1919, it roared in a continuous blur of fire. The ship's gunnery sergeant heard it and nearly threw him overboard. "You'll blow your damn hands off," he yelled. Lawson grinned. "Then I'll pull the trigger with my teeth." The others laughed. But deep down, they knew he might be onto something. Days later, when the invasion fleet arrived off Iwo Jima, the Marines could see the island glowing with artillery fire. Battleship shells rained down, shaking the sea. But when the bombardment stopped, the island looked untouched. The Japanese had hidden deep, waiting for the Marines to land. At 9 a.m. on February 19, 1945, the first wave hit the beach. Within minutes, it became hell on earth. Machine gun fire raked across the sand, cutting down men before they could reach cover. The black volcanic ash trapped their boots and jammed their weapons. Mortar shells exploded without warning, throwing sand and body parts into the air. The Marines tried to dig in, but there was no solid ground, just shifting grit that swallowed their shovels. Sergeant Lawson's squad landed with the second wave. They hit the beach under heavy fire, dragging their M1919 across the sand. The gun's tripod sank, its barrel clogged with ash, and its cooling jacket scorched from the heat. The Japanese guns above were relentless, chattering from pillboxes carved into the ridges. The air was filled with the hiss of bullets and the screams of men trying to crawl forward. Lawson's crew set up their position behind a burnt-out amphibious tractor. He looked at the gun, his modified gun, and said, "Let's see if she dances." When he pressed the trigger, the Browning unleashed a storm. The gun rattled so fast that the barrel glowed red within seconds, but it didn't jam. The suppressive fire pinned the enemy gunners long enough for nearby Marines to move up and toss grenades into the bunker mouths. It wasn't magic. It was mechanical fury. By the time reinforcements reached them, other machine gun crews were staring in disbelief. Lawson's weapon had nearly tripled its rate of fire, spitting close to 200 rounds a minute, an unheard-of number for that model. One of his men shouted over the chaos, "Red! You broke the damn laws of physics!" He just grinned and swapped out a smoking barrel for another. The news spread fast. Across the beachhead, Marines began asking what he'd done. Some thought it was a fluke, others a miracle. Within hours, word reached other platoons. Someone had figured out a way to make the Brownings fire faster. Amid the chaos of Iwo Jima, that rumor became hope. But Lawson didn't share his exact trick. Not yet. He wanted to survive the day first. For now, his only goal was to keep that gun firing, keep the enemy's heads down, and keep his men alive. He had no idea that his small battlefield invention would spark a wave of improvised modifications across the island, ones that would eventually catch the attention of Marine engineers, and later, the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. The beaches of Iwo Jima would soon run red. But on that first day, amid the screams and explosions, one sergeant's idea had already begun to change the fight. And as the sun set over Mount Suribachi, the Marines still fought inch by inch, yard by yard, each man clinging to life, their guns chattering into the darkness. But somewhere in that chaos, one modified Browning kept firing faster, louder, and longer than any other. No one knew it yet. But that sound, the rhythm of Red Lawson's gun, was the sound of ingenuity under fire. By the second day on Iwo Jima, the beaches had turned into a graveyard of twisted metal and silent helmets. The Marines had barely pushed inland, and every advance came at a staggering cost. Each pillbox they destroyed revealed another behind it. The island wasn't just defended, it was designed to kill. But in the middle of that nightmare, whispers were spreading between units. Men were talking about a sergeant who had hot-rodded his Browning machine gun, one that barked like no other on the island. Some called it Lawson's demon. Others didn't even believe it was real, until they heard it. Its roar was different. It was faster, harsher, like a buzzsaw chewing through stone. Lawson's section had taken heavy losses. Out of his original 6-man crew, only 3 remained. Yet their position had become a rally point for Marines pinned on the open sand. When Japanese counterfire would erupt, Lawson's gun answered like thunder. His modification gave them an edge in suppressive firepower, an edge that saved lives. As more officers caught wind of it, curiosity turned to interest. During a short lull in the fighting, a lieutenant from another company crawled over to Lawson's crater. "I heard your gun sings faster than the rest," he shouted over the shell fire. "Mind showing me the tune?" Lawson just smiled grimly, cracked open the receiver, and pointed with his screwdriver. The lieutenant frowned. He barely understood what he was seeing. It was crude, dangerous, and completely unorthodox. The aperture adjustment in the recoil booster had been filed to a narrower opening, forcing higher back pressure. The buffer plate behind the bolt was reinforced with scavenged steel. A small shim of folded brass acted as a tension spacer, increasing the bolt speed. It was a miracle the thing hadn't exploded. But it worked. And word of it kept spreading. Marines started experimenting with their own guns, some using bits of shell casings or washers to mimic Lawson's setup. The results varied. Some guns overheated or jammed, others fired faster but wore out parts quickly. Yet the idea had taken root. Battlefield engineering in the middle of chaos. By the third day, the Japanese launched a counterattack at night. The Marines were exhausted, dug into shallow foxholes surrounded by smoke and the stench of burning oil. From the blackness came screams, flares, and the chatter of Type 99 light machine guns. Lawson's section was nearly overrun. He and his men fired until their ammunition belts ran dry, then scrambled to reload under fire. At that moment, his demon gun made all the difference. The blistering rate of fire tore through the night, lighting up the darkness with streams of red tracers. Every time Lawson pressed the trigger, it sounded like a continuous tearing noise rather than single bursts. The incoming attack stalled, then broke. When dawn rose, his squad was still alive. And so was the gun. Behind the front, word finally reached Marine ordnance officers. A field inspection team arrived. 2 young lieutenants covered in dust and disbelief. They'd been sent to study the strange reports. Guns firing 3 times faster. Barrels glowing red-hot, but not failing outright. When they found Lawson's gun, they stared at it like it was some kind of forbidden artifact. Who authorized this modification? One asked. Lawson spat into the sand. The Japanese did. The lieutenant's expression froze. But there was truth in that answer. In war, necessity often outruns regulation. The officers took notes, sketches, and even fired a few bursts themselves. They confirmed it. Lawson's adjustments increased the cyclic rate to nearly 1/200 rounds per minute, roughly 3 times the standard. However, it came at a cost. The barrels overheated faster, the bolt wear increased dramatically, and ammunition consumption skyrocketed. But for short bursts of close combat, especially against fortified positions, the increase in firepower was devastatingly effective. As the battle dragged on, more Browning crews began applying variations of the Lawson trick. Some even used grease to partially seal the recoil booster, creating more back pressure. Others added makeshift springs behind the buffer assembly. Not every gun survived the treatment, but those that did changed firefights. Behind every technical change was a brutal reality. Iwo Jima wasn't about elegant tactics. It was survival through innovation. The Marines began referring to these field adjustments as red mods, a quiet tribute to the red-haired sergeant whose idea had started it all. It wasn't official, but in war, legends rarely are. By the 5th day, as Marines fought closer to Mount Suribachi, the island's volcanic dust clogged everything. Rifles, machine guns, even lungs. Weapons overheated, jammed, and failed constantly. But the modified Brownings, firing faster bursts, actually handled better in short engagements. They suppressed enemy fire quicker, giving assault teams time to advance. One Marine, Private First Class Tom Givens, later recalled, "When Red's gun started up, we moved. It was like that sound pushed us forward. You knew he had your back." The psychological effect was as real as the mechanical one. The speed and ferocity of that weapon broke the rhythm of battle. Japanese soldiers, used to predictable bursts, hesitated when faced with an enemy gun that sounded like a continuous roar. Even enemy intelligence noticed. After the battle, Japanese reports recovered from captured tunnels mentioned unusually fast-firing American machine guns. They believed the U.S. had secretly developed new automatic weapons for the invasion. In reality, it was just one Marine sergeant with a file, a wrench, and too much courage. When the flag finally rose over Mount Suribachi, the battle was far from over. But the victory marked a turning point. not just for the campaign, but for battlefield improvisation. In later months, engineers at the Ordnance Department examined several surviving Lawson-modified Brownings. Their reports noted the remarkable increase in cyclic rate achieved through gas restriction and spring tension adjustment. It inspired post-war research into adjustable recoil boosters, design features that would appear in later automatic weapons, including some experimental models of the M60 and aircraft-mounted variants. Unintentionally, Sergeant Lawson had pushed the boundaries of what a field machine gun could do. His idea, born from desperation and instinct, mirrored a pattern seen throughout history. Soldiers in the field solving problems faster than the factories could. Similar cases would later emerge. Pilots modifying gun mounts, tank crews welding armor plates from scrap, and infantrymen altering grenade fuses for different effects. Each one a small defiance of regulation, but a testament to survival. On Iwo Jima, though, the cost was staggering. Of the roughly 70,000 Marines who landed, over 26,000 became casualties. The island was finally secured after 36 days of relentless combat. And somewhere in those black sands, among the burned-out bunkers and shattered guns, Lawson's original weapon was left behind. Its barrel warped, its receiver cracked, but its story very much alive. Even decades later, veterans would tell it. They'd talk about the sergeant who made his Browning sing faster than death. Some called him reckless, others called him a genius, but all agreed. He gave them something to believe in when everything else was chaos. And in war, sometimes belief fires faster than bullets. The night before the final push on Iwo Jima, the island trembled under ceaseless bombardment. The mountain loomed above the black horizon like a broken tooth, its slopes pockmarked with fire and ruin. The smell of sulfur clung to everything: sweat, blood, and gun oil. Sergeant Lawson sat behind a battered sandbag wall, his hands blackened, his eyes hollow from days without sleep. Beside him, the demon gun rested against its tripod, patched and scarred but still alive. He stared at it, the way a man might look at a wild animal he'd tamed, something powerful, unpredictable, and dangerous. The brass shims were warped from heat, the recoil booster dented from constant firing. Every mechanic's instinct told him the gun should have failed long ago. Yet it hadn't. It had survived alongside him, its heart still beating in rapid bursts of fire. The Marines around him prepared for the assault on Suribachi's slopes. They'd heard the stories, how the red mods had turned ordinary Brownings into monsters of steel. Some of the new replacements were nervous, asking Lawson to show them the trick. He shook his head. "You don't need a faster gun," he said quietly. "You just need to keep it alive." But in truth, part of him knew that his trick had already escaped him. Dozens of machine guns across the island had been altered, each one a slightly different version of his creation. The idea had spread like wildfire, just as unstoppable as dawn broke. The order came down: advance. The assault up Mount Suribachi was unlike anything before. Every inch of ground was contested, every boulder possibly hiding an enemy barrel. The Japanese had built an underground labyrinth, and from its holes poured machine gun fire and grenades. Marines hugged the ground, returning fire wherever they could. But the enemy was dug in too deep. Then came the moment that would etch itself into the memory of everyone who survived that day. A Japanese bunker on the right flank opened up with two Type 92 heavy machine guns, cutting into the advancing line like a scythe. Marines fell instantly, pinned with no cover in the open. A squad tried to flank, but was driven back by grenades. The attack was about to stall until Lawson crawled forward through the ash, dragging his gun. He positioned himself behind a piece of shattered concrete and yelled for ammo. His assistant gunner, barely 19, slid beside him with belts slung over his shoulder. Lawson mounted the Browning, eyes narrow, hands steady. He could see the flashes of the enemy gun through the bunker slit. Perfect alignment. He took a breath, muttered, "Let's dance," and squeezed the trigger. The demon gun roared to life. The barrel blazed instantly, the recoil shaking the ground. Bullets tore into the bunker slit, chipping stone, shredding the air with a continuous metallic shriek. The sheer volume of fire pinned the defenders completely. Smoke rose from the weapon's jacket, and the belt ran through like a river of brass. Other Marines saw it and rallied. Riflemen moved up behind the cover of Lawson's furious barrage. A flamethrower team crawled closer, hugging the ground. Then, one final burst, and the bunker vanished in a plume of fire as the flamethrower sent liquid flame pouring inside. Silence followed, broken only by the click of Lawson's empty chamber. He slumped back, coughing, his face smeared with ash. His assistant was grinning wildly. "You did it, Red! You got him!" Lawson gave a tired nod. "We got him," he corrected. That moment broke the flank's resistance. The Marines surged forward, clearing the ridge one position at a time. By afternoon, the stars and stripes would rise over Mount Suribachi, a symbol of victory, captured forever in the photograph the world would soon see. But for the men on the ground, the fight didn't feel over. Not yet. Lawson's gun finally gave out that evening. The recoil booster cracked clean through, the bolt jammed, and the weapon seized after thousands of rounds. He looked at it, almost gently, as though it were a friend dying in his arms. He'd pushed it beyond its limits, and it had pushed him beyond his own. When the battle finally ended weeks later, only a handful of his original unit remained. The island was theirs, but the cost was unbearable. Still, among the survivors, the legend of the demon gun became part of Iwo Jima's living memory. After the war, Lawson returned home to Illinois. Like most veterans, he didn't talk much about what he'd done. He went back to fixing tractors, repairing engines, machines that didn't bleed or scream. But every now and then, at reunions or over a drink, someone would ask about Iwo, and someone else would nudge him and say, "Tell them about the gun." He'd smile faintly, look down at his hands and say, "It wasn't the gun. It was the need." The Army Ordnance Department later documented his improvised modification. Though never officially adopted in its raw form, the principles behind it, gas manipulation and spring tension adjustment, found their way into later weapon designs. Some historians argue that Lawson's field adjustment directly influenced experimental variants tested for aircraft guns and vehicle mounts. But beyond blueprints and manuals, Lawson's legacy lived where it mattered most, in the stories of men who survived because of that sound, that furious rhythm of survival. In war, innovation doesn't always come from laboratories or factories. Sometimes it's born in the dirt, forged by necessity and fear. On Iwo Jima, amid the chaos and carnage, one Marine sergeant showed what human ingenuity could do under impossible conditions. His act wasn't celebrated with medals or headlines, but its echo carried far beyond the Black Sands. Years later, when military historians revisited Iwo Jima, they interviewed surviving machine gunners. One old veteran, his voice cracked with age, said, "We didn't have super weapons or fancy tech. We had guys like Red, guys who thought on their feet. That's what won wars. Not just courage, but cleverness. And maybe that's the truth. Behind every great victory are the small, unrecorded acts, the split-second decisions, the improvised tools, the stubborn refusal to give up." Lawson's gun never made it to a museum. It was too battered, too broken. But somewhere in the archives, there's a photograph of it. Scorched, twisted, its metal blackened by battle. Beneath it, a handwritten note reads, "Modified Browning M1919. Field Alteration, Iwo Jima, 1945. Unknown Sergeant, unknown." Because Lawson never wanted credit. To him, it wasn't invention. It was survival. And in that survival, lies a lesson bigger than war. Sometimes, progress comes not from those who follow the rules, but from those willing to break them when the moment demands it. The Battle of Iwo Jima became one of the most iconic in American history. It symbolized sacrifice, endurance, and the unbreakable will of ordinary men facing extraordinary odds. And somewhere beneath that mountain, among the ashes of a world at war, still rests the echo of a gun that fired too fast, too hard, and too true. A gun that shouldn't have worked, but did, because one sergeant believed it could. And that belief, born from desperation, held together by grease and courage, turned into something far greater than metal and fire. It became proof that even in hell, the human spirit still invents, adapts, and fights to survive.